The barn smelled like rot and fear. Dust hung thick in the air, backlit by shafts of late afternoon sun that sliced through the warped planks. The kind of light that made everything look half real, like a fever dream you couldn't shake even after waking. Flies buzzed lazy circles near the rafters. Outside, horses stamped and snorted, but inside it was quiet except for the low murmur of men exchanging coin and cruelty. Marcus Flint stood near the back wall, hat pulled low, shoulders hunched like he was trying to disappear into the shadows. He wasn't supposed to be here, wasn't planning on it. He'd ridden into Carson's Bend looking for work, ranch hand, stable work, anything that kept him moving and didn't ask questions. But the men at the saloon had laughed when he'd asked about honest wages. Honest, one had said, grinning through tobacco-stained teeth. Try Macklin's barn if you want something cheap. Auctions tonight. Marcus had thought they meant livestock. He'd been wrong. Now he stood frozen, watching as a broad-shouldered man in a grey vest, Macklin, presumably, paced in front of a makeshift stage built from stacked crates and old wagon boards. A line of women stood behind him, wrists bound with frayed rope, faces turned down or away. Some were young, some were old enough to be mothers. All of them carried the same hollow look, like they'd already died inside and were just waiting for their bodies to catch up. Next lot, Macklin called out, his voice thick with false cheer. Young widow, came from a burned-out homestead up north. No family, no claim, clean enough, strong enough. He paused, grinning. And carrion, if that matters to any of you. A few men chuckled. Others leaned forward, interested. Marcus felt his stomach turn. Macklin gestured, and one of his hired hands, a wiry man with a scar splitting his lip, dragged a woman forward by her elbow. She stumbled, barely catching herself before she fell. Her dress was faded blue, patched at the shoulders and hem, and her dark hair hung loose and tangled around her face. She didn't look up, didn't fight, just stood there, breathing shallow and fast, her bound wrists pressed against the swell of her belly. Pregnant, visibly so, maybe 6 months, maybe more. Don't, she whispered, so quiet Marcus almost missed it. Don't look there. Not a plea for rescue, a plea for mercy, for invisibility. Marcus's chest tightened. Starting bid, Macklin announced, $20. She's field-trained, can cook, can sew. You're getting 2 for the price of 1 if you wait long enough. More laughter, crueler this time. The woman flinched, but didn't lift her head. A man near the front raised his hand. 20. 25, another called from the side. Marcus's hands curled into fists. He should leave, should walk out, ride away, forget he'd ever seen this place. He'd spent the last 8 years keeping his head down, staying out of other people's business, because getting involved only got you killed or worse. But he couldn't move. Because when the woman finally lifted her face, just for a second, just enough to glance toward the barn door like she was searching for an escape that didn't exist, Marcus saw her clearly. And his heart stopped. The scar. A pale line running from her right temple down to her cheekbone, jagged and old. The kind of scar that came from barbed wire or broken glass, something sharp that tore instead of cut clean. He knew that scar. 8 years ago, a burned-out homestead north of Abilene, a family named Pritchard. Marcus had been riding with a Union patrol then, just a kid trying to prove himself, following orders he didn't understand. They'd been hunting deserters, or so the captain said. But when they'd reached the Pritchard farm, there'd been no soldiers, just a man, his wife, and a young girl hiding in the root cellar. The captain had called them Confederate sympathizers, said they were harboring traitors. Marcus had watched as they dragged the father out, put him on his knees, and he'd turned away, hadn't stopped it, hadn't said a word. But the girl, maybe 12, maybe 13, had tried to run. She'd caught her face on the fence as one of the soldiers grabbed her, and Marcus had been the one to pull her back, to wrap the wound with a strip of cloth torn from his own shirt, while she screamed and sobbed, and the world burned around them. He'd whispered, I'm sorry, and then he'd ridden away with the rest of them. He'd never gone back. Now here she stood, 8 years older, 8 years harder, carrying a child and bound like livestock in a barn that reeked of sweat and sin. and she didn't recognize him. 30, someone shouted. Macklin grinned. Now we're talking, 30 going once. 50, Marcus heard himself say. Every head in the barn turned. Macklin's grin widened. Well now, $50 from the quiet man in the back. Anyone wanna go higher? Silence. The woman's eyes found Marcus for the first time, and he saw confusion flicker across her face, then suspicion, then something darker, resignation. Sold, Macklin said, slapping his palm against the crate. $50, pay up front, Cowboy. Marcus moved through the crowd on numb legs, pulling the folded bills from his vest pocket. It was most of what he had left. He handed it over without a word, and Macklin counted it twice before nodding. She's all yours, he said, cutting the rope around her wrists with a knife that gleamed in the dusty light. Enjoy your purchase. The woman didn't move, just stood there, rubbing her wrists, staring at Marcus like she was trying to figure out if he was a devil she knew or a devil she didn't. Marcus swallowed hard. Come on, he said quietly, let's go. She didn't follow right away, just looked at him with those hollow eyes and whispered, why? He didn't have an answer. So he turned and walked toward the barn door, praying she'd follow, praying he wasn't about to make the second worst mistake of his life. Behind him, he heard her footsteps, slow, hesitant, but there. And as they stepped out into the fading light, Marcus felt the weight of 8 years settle heavier on his shoulders than it ever had before. They walked in silence. Marcus led his horse by the reins, the woman trailing a few paces behind. He'd offered to let her ride, but she'd just shaken her head and kept walking, arms wrapped around herself despite the evening heat. The town fell away behind them, replaced by open prairie and the distant silhouette of hills turning purple in the dusk. He didn't know where he was going, didn't have a plan. He'd bought her because he couldn't not buy her, because 8 years of guilt had finally caught up to him in a barn that smelled like death, and he'd done the only thing he could think of in the moment. But now what? After a mile, he stopped near a cluster of cottonwoods where a thin creek cut through the grass. We'll camp here tonight, he said, not looking at her. I'll get a fire going. She didn't respond. He tied his horse to a low branch and started gathering deadwood, moving mechanically, trying to ignore the way she stood perfectly still at the edge of the firelight, watching him like he was a rattlesnake coiled to strike. When the fire finally caught, crackling low and orange, he pulled a tin of beans and some hardtack from his saddlebag and set them near the flames. You should eat, he said. Why'd you buy me? She asked. Her voice was flat, not grateful, not afraid, just empty. Marcus sat back on his heels, staring into the fire. I didn't buy you to own you. Then what? I don't know. She laughed, sharp, bitter. You spent $50 and you don't know why. He flinched. It's complicated. Complicated. She stepped closer, her shadow long and dark across the grass. You think spending money on a woman in chains makes you better than the rest of them. You think it makes you good. No. Then what do you want from me? Marcus looked up at her then, and the firelight caught the scar on her face, pale and jagged, just like he remembered. His throat tightened. I don't want anything. Everybody wants something. I couldn't leave you there. Why not? She crouched down across the fire from him, her eyes hard and searching. You don't know me, you don't owe me anything, so why? He should have lied, should have said something easy, something that didn't open the door to the past, but the words came out before he could stop them. Because I knew you, he said quietly, a long time ago. She froze. You were just a kid, Marcus continued, his voice rough. Your family Pritchard right, north of Abilene, your father raised cattle, your mother baked bread that smelled like heaven, and you had a dog, brown mutt with a white patch on his chest. Her face went pale. I was there, Marcus said, the words spilling out now like a wound finally lanced. I was riding with a Union patrol. We came to your farm looking for deserters. My captain said your family was hiding traitors, and I didn't stop him. I didn't say anything. I just stood there while he stopped, swallowing hard. You tried to run, caught your face on the fence. I wrapped it, told you I was sorry, and then I rode away like a coward. She stared at him, her breath coming fast and shallow. You. Yeah. You were there. Yeah. She stood abruptly, backing away from the fire, her hands trembling. You were there, you let them, her voice cracked. They killed my father, burned everything, and you. I know. You left us. I know. And now what you think buying me makes it right? Her voice rose, shaking with fury and something rower. You think $50 pays for what you did, for what you didn't do? No, Marcus said, standing slowly, hands raised like he was calming a spooked horse. I don't think that. I don't think anything makes it right. But I saw you in that barn, and I couldn't. He stopped high. Voice breaking. I couldn't leave you again. She stared at him, tears streaming down her face now, her whole body shaking. I was 13. I know. I watched them kill him. I know. And you did nothing. I know. She turned away, her shoulders heaving with silent sobs. For a long moment, the only sound was the crackle of the fire and the distant call of a night bird. Then, so quiet he almost didn't hear it, she whispered, "My name's Clara." Marcus exhaled slowly, "Clara." She turned back to face him, her eyes red-rimmed but clear. "If you're trying to make yourself feel better, it's not going to work. I don't forgive you. I don't expect you to." "Good." She walked back to the fire and sat down, pulling her knees to her chest. After a moment, she reached for the tin of beans and ate in silence, her hands still shaking slightly. Marcus sat across from her, watching the flames, feeling the weight of the past settle between them like a third presence. "So what now?" Clara asked eventually, her voice hoarse. "I don't know," Marcus admitted. "I'll take you wherever you want to go, find you a place that's safe, give you what money I have left, then I'll leave, you'll never see me again." She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she said, "That auction wasn't what you think it was." Marcus frowned. "What do you mean?" Clara's eyes flicked toward the darkness beyond the firelight, then back to him. "It was a trap," she whispered. And before Marcus could respond, the sound of hoofbeats echoed across the prairie, coming fast, coming from the direction of town. Marcus was on his feet in an instant, hand moving to the revolver at his hip. Clara scrambled backward, pressing herself against the trunk of a cottonwood, her face pale in the firelight. The hoofbeats grew louder, 3 horses, maybe 4, moving at a steady gallop. They weren't trying to be quiet. "Put out the fire," Clara hissed. Marcus kicked dirt over the flames, plunging them into near darkness. Moonlight filtered through the cottonwood branches, casting skeletal shadows across the grass. He moved to Clara's side, crouching low, his eyes fixed on the tree line where the riders would emerge. "Who are they?" he whispered. "The men I was running from," she said, her voice tight with fear. "The ones who put me in that barn in the first place." "Macklin." "No, worse." The riders burst into the clearing, 4 of them, spread out in a loose line. They reined in their horses hard, the animals snorting and stamping. In the moonlight, Marcus could make out their silhouettes, 3 men in dusters and wide-brimmed hats, and one in the center wearing a long coat and a star pinned to his chest. A lawman. Marcus's blood ran cold. "Marcus Flint," the man with the star called out, his voice carrying easily across the clearing. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." How did he know his name? Clara's hand gripped his arm, her fingers digging in hard. "I told you," she whispered, "it was a trap." The lawman dismounted, his boots hitting the ground with a heavy thud. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and thick through the middle, with a mustache that drooped past his jawline. He walked forward slowly, one hand resting casually on the butt of his pistol. "Name's Sheriff Dalton," he said, stopping about 20 feet away. "And you just made a very expensive mistake, son." Marcus stood slowly, stepping in front of Clara. "I paid for her fair and square. Macklin took the money." Dalton chuckled, low and mean. Oh, I know he did, but see, the woman you bought, she's wanted, fugitive from justice, stole property that didn't belong to her and ran. We've been tracking her for 3 weeks. That's a lie, Clara said, her voice shaking but fierce. Is it? Dalton tilted his head, his smile widening. Tell him what you took, Clara. Tell him about the land deed. Marcus glanced back at her. What's he talking about? Clara's jaw tightened. My husband, before he died, he owned a piece of land up north. Good land near water. After he passed, Dalton here decided he wanted it, tried to buy it for pennies. When I wouldn't sell, her voice cracked. He burned my cabin, killed my husband's brother when he tried to stop them, and then he came after me. That's a real touching story, Dalton said, pulling a folded piece of paper from his coat pocket. Except the law says that land belongs to the county now. Unpaid taxes, you see, all legal, all proper. And when Mrs. Pritchard here refused to vacate, she became a squatter, a thief. You're twisting the truth, Clara spat. I'm enforcing the law. Dalton's smile faded. Now I'm a reasonable man. You hand over the deed, Clara, and I'll let you walk away. You and your buyer, no harm, no foul. I don't have it, she said. Liar. I don't. Dalton sighed, like a patient father dealing with a stubborn child. Then I guess we do this the hard way. He looked at Marcus. You really want to die for a woman you bought at auction, son. A woman carrying another man's bastard. Marcus's grip tightened on his revolver. She's not property. Says the man who paid $50 for her. I'm taking her somewhere safe. Then I'm riding out. You'll never see either of us again. Dalton shook his head slowly. Can't let that happen. See, Macklin works for me, always has. That auction, that was bait. We knew Clara couldn't resist trying to sneak into town for supplies. We grabbed her, cleaned her up, and waited to see who'd be stupid enough to buy her. He grinned. Congratulations, you're exactly as stupid as I hoped. Clara's breath hitched. You used me as bait. Worked, didn't it? Dalton gestured to his men. Now I'm gonna give you one last chance, Flint. Walk away, leave the woman, forget you ever saw her, or we put you in the ground right here and nobody'll ever know the difference. This is wild country. Men disappear all the time. Marcus didn't move. Dalton's smile vanished. Your funeral. One of the deputies raised his rifle. And then a voice called out from the darkness beyond the tree line. Dalton, that you. Everyone froze. Dalton spun, his hand moving to his gun. Who's there? A horse emerged from the shadows, and on its back was an older man with silver hair and a weathered face. He wore a worn rancher's coat and carried a shotgun across his saddle. Behind him, 2 more riders appeared, younger men, ranch hands by the look of them, both armed. The older man reined in at the edge of the clearing, his eyes sweeping over the scene. Heard there was trouble out this way, he said calmly. Thought I'd check. Dalton's jaw tightened. This is law business, Mr. Calhoun, doesn't concern you. Law business. Calhoun's gaze shifted to Marcus, then to Clara, then back to Dalton. Funny, looks more like you're about to shoot an unarmed man and a pregnant woman in the dark. They're fugitives. Are they? Calhoun dismounted slowly, his shotgun still cradled in his arms. Or are you just trying to steal a widow's land again, like you did to the Harrisons last year, and the Bryants the year before that? Dalton's face darkened. You watch your mouth, old man. Or what? Calhoun stepped forward, and his 2 ranch hands moved up behind him, flanking him on either side. You gonna shoot me too, in front of witnesses? For a long, tense moment, nobody moved. Then Dalton spat into the dirt. This isn't over, he said, his voice low and venomous. He looked at Marcus. You and her, you're dead, just a matter of time. He turned and mounted his horse, jerking the reins hard. His deputies followed, and within seconds they were gone, hoofbeats fading into the night. Calhoun watched them go, then turned to Marcus. You're lucky I was passing through. Thank you, Marcus said, his voice hoarse. Calhoun nodded. Then he looked at Clara, his expression softening. You're safe for now, ma'am, but Dalton doesn't let things go. If I were you, I'd keep moving. Clara nodded, tears streaming down her face. Calhoun tipped his hat, mounted his horse, and rode off into the darkness with his men. Marcus and Clara stood in the silence, breathing hard, the weight of what had just happened settling over them like a heavy blanket. So Marcus said quietly, "This auction was a trap." "Yeah, and you knew." "Not until I saw Dalton's men watching from outside the barn." Marcus exhaled slowly. "What's on that deed?" Clara looked at him, her eyes haunted. "Everything I have left." They didn't rebuild the fire. Instead, they sat in the darkness under the cottonwoods, listening to the wind move through the branches and the creek burble over stones. Marcus kept his hand on his revolver, eyes scanning the tree line, while Clara sat with her back against a trunk, arms wrapped around her knees. After a long silence, she spoke, "You don't have to stay." Marcus glanced at her. "You think I'm leaving you out here alone after what just happened? You didn't sign up for this." "Doesn't matter." "It should." He turned to face her fully. "Clara, I left you once. I'm not doing it again." She looked away, her jaw working. "You don't owe me anything." "Maybe not, but I'm staying anyway." For a moment, she didn't respond. Then, so quietly he almost missed it, she said, "I don't remember your name." "What?" "From that day when you wrapped my face. I was so scared and everything was burning and you said you were sorry, but I don't remember your name." Marcus swallowed hard. Marcus Flint." "Marcus," she repeated, testing the word. "I remembered your eyes, blue like winter sky. I remembered your hands shaking when you tied the bandage, but I didn't know your name." "I'm sorry." "Stop saying that." "What do you want me to say?" She turned to look at him, her eyes wet but steady. "I want you to tell me why you're really here, and don't say it's because you feel guilty. Guilt fades. Guilt doesn't make a man ride into danger for a strange." "Oh." Marcus was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. Finally he said, "After that day, after your farm, I left the patrol, couldn't stomach it anymore. Spent the next 8 years drifting, working whatever jobs I could find, trying to forget. But I couldn't." He looked up at her. "Every time I closed my eyes, I saw your face, heard you screaming, and I thought, if I just kept moving, eventually it would stop. But it never did." "So this is about you feeling better?" "No," he shook his head. "I'll never feel better, but maybe if I do this one thing right, it'll mean I'm not the same coward I was back then." Clara studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she said, "You know I'm still angry with you." "I know. And I don't trust you." "I know." But she hesitated. "I don't want to be alone right now." Marcus nodded slowly. "Then you won't be." She exhaled, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. After a moment, she shifted, pulling something from the pocket of her dress, a small, worn leather pouch. She opened it carefully, and in the moonlight, Marcus saw the edge of a folded piece of paper. "The deed," he said. "Yeah," Clara looked at it like it might burn her. 300 acres. Good water, good grazing. My husband bought it right before the war ended. We were going to build a life there, raise cattle, have a family." Her voice wavered. "He died before we ever set foot on it. Fever took him last winter." "I'm sorry." "Dalton found out about it a month after the funeral, showed up with his papers saying I owed back taxes, but my husband had already paid them. I had the receipts. Dalton didn't care, burned my cabin, ran me off. I've been hiding ever since." "Why not just give him the deed?" "Because it's all I have left," she said fiercely. "It's the last piece of the life we were supposed to have, and if I give it up, then he won, all of them won. The war, the soldiers, the men like Dalton who think they can take whatever they want because they've got a badge or a gun or a piece of paper that says they're right." She looked at Marcus, her eyes blazing. "I won't let them have it, not without a fight." Marcus felt something shift in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. Respect, admiration, maybe even hope. "Okay," he said. "Okay, what?" "Okay, we fight." Clara blinked. "What?" "You're right, Dalton doesn't get to win, so we figure out a way to stop him." "Marcus, he's a sheriff. He's got men, guns, the law on his side. The law's only on his side if people believe him. Marcus leaned forward. Calhoun didn't. Those ranch hands didn't, which means Dalton's reputation isn't as solid as he thinks. We just need to find the right people, the ones who have been burned by him before, the ones who are tired of watching him take what he wants. Clara stared at him. You're serious? Yeah. You're going to start a fight with a corrupt sheriff over a piece of land you've never seen. Yeah. She shook her head slowly, something like disbelief crossing her face. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed, soft and broken but real. You're insane. Probably. We're going to die. Maybe. And you're still going to do it. Yeah. Clara looked at him for a long moment, and Marcus saw something in her eyes shift. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the beginning of something else. Trust, or at least the willingness to try. Okay, she said quietly. Okay. Okay, we fight. Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of the decision settle over him. It wasn't redemption, it wasn't absolution, but it was something. It was a start. So here's the question. If you were Marcus, would you fight a corrupt sheriff for a woman you wronged 8 years ago? Or would you ride away and let the past stay buried? Take a breath, think about that. And if you're still with me, you'll want to see how this ends. They rode into Carson's Bend at dawn. Marcus hadn't slept. Neither had Clara. They'd spent the night planning, talking in low voices, and by the time the sun crept over the horizon, they had something resembling a strategy, fragile, risky, but possible. The town was just waking when they arrived, shopkeepers sweeping porches, a few early risers heading toward the saloon for breakfast. Marcus could feel eyes on them as they rode down the main street, whispers following in their wake. He didn't care. They stopped outside the land office, a narrow building with peeling paint and a crooked sign. Marcus dismounted, helped Clara down, and together they walked inside. The clerk behind the desk looked up, startled. He was a thin man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers. Can I help you? We need to file a claim, Marcus said, placing the deed on the desk. Legal ownership, 300 acres north of here, taxes paid in full. The clerk glanced at the paper, then at Clara, then back at Marcus. This is Clara Pritchard's land. That's right, Sheriff Dalton said. Sheriff Dalton lied, Clara saw. Id firmly, my husband paid the taxes, I have the receipts, and I'm filing this claim officially right now so there's a record. The clerk hesitated, his gaze flicking toward the window. Ma'am, I don't want trouble. Then don't make any, Marcus said, just do your job. The clerk swallowed hard, then nodded. He pulled out a ledger, dipped his pen in ink, and began copying the information from the deed. His hand shook slightly, but he wrote. When he finished, he stamped the page and handed Clara a receipt. It's official, you're the legal owner. Thank you, Clara said. They left the office and walked back into the street and found Dalton waiting. He stood in the middle of the road, hands on his hips, flanked by his 3 deputies. His face was red, his jaw clenched tight. Behind him, a small crowd had gathered, curious townspeople drawn by the tension. You think a piece of paper's going to save you, Dalton called out. I think the law's the law, Clara said, her voice steady, and you don't get to ignore it just because it's inconvenient. I am the law in this town. Not anymore. A voice rang out from the crowd, Mr. Calhoun, stepping forward with 2 of his ranch hands. She's right, Dalton. We've all watched you twist the rules for years, taking land, running people off, calling it legal, but it stops now. Dalton's face darkened. You want to make this your fight, old man? It already is, Calhoun said. And then, one by one, others stepped forward, men and women Dalton had wronged, people who'd been too afraid to speak up before, but now found their courage in numbers. You took my brother's farm, one man said. You ran my family out, a woman added. You're a thief with a badge, another called. Dalton's hand moved toward his gun, but Calhoun raised his shotgun. "Don't," he said quietly. "There's too many of us now, and too many witnesses." For a long, tense moment, Dalton stood frozen, his eyes darting between the crowd and Marcus and Clara. Then, slowly, his hand dropped. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and venomous. "Yeah," Marcus said, "it is." Dalton stared at him for another beat, then turned and walked away, his deputies following. The crowd watched him go, and when he disappeared around the corner, a collective exhale rippled through the street. Calhoun walked over to Clara and tipped his hat. "You've got grit, ma'am. Your land's safe now. I'll make sure of it." "Thank you," Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. Calhoun nodded, then turned to Marcus. "You did good, son." Marcus didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. 3 weeks later. The cabin was small, but it was solid. Marcus had spent 2 weeks helping Clara rebuild it on her land, 300 acres of open prairie with a creek running through the eastern edge. The roof was patched, the door hung straight, and there was a small garden plot near the porch where Clara had started planting seeds. Marcus stood near the fence line, hammer in hand, finishing the last post. His horse grazed nearby, and the sun was warm on his back. He heard footsteps and turned to see Clara walking toward him, carrying a tin cup of water. She handed it to him without a word, and he drank gratefully. "You're almost done," she said, looking at the fence. "Yeah." "Then what?" Marcus set the cup down, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Then I leave, like I said." Clara was quiet for a moment, staring out at the horizon. "You don't have to." He looked at her, surprised. "I mean," she continued, her voice careful, "there's a lot of work to do here, more than I can manage alone, especially once," she touched her belly lightly, "once the baby comes." "Clara." "I'm not saying I forgive you," she said quickly. "I'm not sure I ever will, but I don't hate you, and I don't want to do this alone." Marcus felt something crack open in his chest, something he'd thought was dead for 8 years. "You sure?" "No," she admitted, "but I'm willing to try, if you are." He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the girl he'd failed 8 years ago, but a woman who'd survived more than most people could imagine. A woman who was offering him something he didn't deserve. "A chance?" "Yeah," he said quietly, "I'm willing to try." Clara nodded, a small, tentative smile crossing her face. "Good, then get back to work. That fence isn't going to build itself." Marcus laughed, short and rough, but real, and picked up his hammer. Years later. The cabin was bigger now. 2 rooms added on, a barn near the creek, a herd of cattle grazing in the distance. A boy with dark hair and his mother's eyes played in the dirt near the porch, laughing as he chased a brown dog with a white patch on its chest. Marcus stood by the fence, older now, gray starting to thread through his hair. He watched Clara hang laundry on the line, her movements easy and familiar. She glanced over at him and smiled, not the broken smile of a survivor, but the warm smile of a woman who'd found peace. And Marcus realized something. He'd never be free of the past. The ghosts of what he'd done and what he'd failed to do would follow him for the rest of his life. But maybe that was okay. Maybe redemption wasn't about forgetting. Maybe it was about carrying the weight and choosing every single day to do better. The boy ran over, tugging on Marcus's pant leg. "Pa, can we go fishing?" Marcus looked down at him, his throat tight. "Yeah, son, let's go fishing." Clara watched them walk toward the creek together, the dog bounding after them, and she thought about the night in the barn when a stranger had bought her freedom with money he couldn't afford. She thought about the scar on her face and the scars that couldn't be seen. She thought about forgiveness, how it wasn't a single moment, but 1,000 small choices made over years. And as the sun dipped low, painting the prairie gold, Clara decided that maybe, just maybe, some traps were worth walking into. Because sometimes, the thing you're running from is the very thing that saves you.